a lot to the organizers, Dr. Amit, Dr. Julian, for inviting me, and thank you to Amrita University also for hosting us here for the next 2 days now. So I think we'll be concluding with my talk. So I'll try to keep it brief, and the plan is to keep it brief.
We have one more. He's on schedule.
Okay. So I'll be talking about designing resilient solutions and the need of embracing diversity among the smallholder farming systems that we have. And that is the core synthesis of my work. So when my presentation is also a review of 10 years journey that I am now completing in the research domain. So I'll be referring to all the work that I've done and then asking myself and also requesting you to reflect back on some of these questions that I've tried to address through my research and understand that. So fundamentally, when I started my research, one of the questions that I was interested in is how resilient food systems should be designed. And two questions that were pertinent to that were that, if we need to design resilient food systems, we need to ensure food security and livelihood security. And for that, we need to identify where are the most vulnerable people living and where are these most vulnerable communities within those locations that are living there. What are these vulnerable communities? So the first question that I have is, what are these locations of high vulnerability? Do they change over time? And the second is, which are these communities that reside within these vulnerable locations? So we'll take the first question that we have. This is what I started my research career with. This was one of the publications that we had, and we tried to look at the vulnerability of agriculture systems at national level in India, and we identified that different districts in different agroecological zone, when we look at data from climate system and when we integrate it with socioeconomic indicators, we find that there is a pattern that emerged when we try to identify these vulnerability. The work is, I would say, outdated now. We have many more reports that have come after this, and the point that I want to highlight here is that in all of these reports, these colors that we see here are very different. They might indicate the same thing. The red colors mostly will identify a region of high vulnerability, but these locations are not always same. In some of the maps, Uttarakhand, some of the districts that I identify in Uttarakhand will be receiving a high vulnerability. In some other report, it might come in a different vulnerability profile. So these have a limited application is what I learned. So this doesn't move. Yeah. And so when I did this, one of the next question that came to my mind was that now that I have these red hotspots, how do I identify what communities are living there? That's the second question that I was interested in. What we did with this was that I did a local level study in one of the states that was identified as high vulnerability states. We developed a framework to understand again the vulnerability of the districts that were there in this state, and we did a village level assessment, and we found that different villages in the state of Uttarakhand, which is in the northern part of India, have different vulnerability. Again, you have some villages, and this analysis was done for around 16,000 villages that are there in Uttarakhand, and we found that there are again these colors that emerge. They have many different meanings, but for our discussion point here is that there are some villages that are again highlighted as red. Then what do we do with that information? One use is that I now go to the state agencies and tell them that these villages are where high vulnerability lies. Please, let's act onto it and do something about it. But what I did as a next step was that I went to these villages which were identified as highly vulnerable. Went to some of these villages, 10 villages we visited. And one of my hypotheses was that, okay, people will be facing similar kind of risk, people will be having similar kind of agriculture practices, because that is what my data showed. So my data showed me that only one color, there was no gradation in that color for this particular village. So we went in there and we talked to farmers with the hypothesis that, okay, we can recommend some kind of a similar solution for all these sites that are red. but that was something that we did not find there. We found that, all these vulnerable hotspots that we have, there's an immense diversity in the farming system. There's a lot of diversity not only in the farming system, the kind of crops they grow, the kind of orientation a farmer has towards farming, but also in terms of the different types of farmers that are there. So some are farmers that are some are farmers that are interested in only doing market cash crops. Some are farmers that are only interested in doing some kind of subsistence based agriculture farming. Some are interested in only some are not even interested in doing agriculture right now. So it was a diversified spectrum that we found in the same hotspot, and there were different strategies, and we did some kind of a statistical assessment to come out to these different types that we see. We used clustering algorithms and other multivariate statistic techniques, and we found that there is a spectrum of different farmers that are there in these hotspots, and they have different kind of strategies that they are taking for adapting to these climate risks. Though the climate risk is posing similar kind of challenges for all the farmers, but the kind of strategies that they have is different. Some which we call them as a type 5 farmer, and the type 5 farmer are basically landless and farmers who have very limited land and mostly practicing agriculture as laborers, are dropping out of these activities. They do not want to work any further as agriculture laborers. They are basically going and preferring for seasonal migration. They are selling whatever assets they have, and they do not want to continue agriculture as a practice anymore. Whereas there are some farmers that are also stepping up, and these farmers are farmers who have higher resources at their endowment. They have higher resources endowments, and they can make use of those endowments and have higher capacity to build on these endowments, and they're also stepping up in their farming agriculture practices. So we wanted to from this work, what we wanted to highlight was that it's not one fit solution that we intended we can propose for all these high vulnerability risk regions. Because the farmers are using different kind of strategies, there has to be different support mechanisms that has to come for these 5 different farmer types that we could identify from our work. Then now that we established that we could understand that there's some bit of heterogeneity in these, or a lot of heterogeneity in these locations where we surveyed. So we wanted to understand that how the policies that are there for climate adaptation, and how do they understand farming, and how do they understand climate change adaptation. What you see here is that this is the word cloud that we get when we look at the most frequent word cloud that we have is for the policy documents, and this is the most frequent words that we get when we look at the adaptation, peer-reviewed adaptation, climate change adaptation literature. So what we see here is, and it's just a schematic, it's not it's not giving any scientific evidence, but gives an indication that there is a lot of focus on the policy documents and the agriculture system. So they're talking a lot about the profitability of the agriculture system, talking about yields, more yields per hectare, but probably not so much engagement with the farmer. But whereas in the adaptation literature, it is suggested or prescribed that there has to be more engagement with the farmer, in terms of the access, making these strategies localized, and on equity issues as well. And then we also, in the same work, what we also did was we looked at these 14 different policy documents which are related to agriculture, understanding farmers, and climate change actions, recommending climate change action within the agriculture sector. We found only one policy, which is the national farmer policy, that gave a formal definition of who a farmer is. No other policy document had a definition of who they indicate or who they identify as a farmer. Whether are we talking about female farmers, are we talking about farmers who grow certain type of crops, or we are talking about livestock farmers. So there was just one policy that was that gave a formal definition, and there was no cross reference that was made in other policies also to this definition. That was another finding. And what we also found, there are many findings, but just what I wanted to say here is that there is no mention of landless farmers or any provisions for farm laborers that is not mentioned in most of these policies. So we have a definition, we do identify our landless or agricultural laborers as farmers, but there are no provisions or any kind of strategies that is recommended for these farmers that have no that have no land, agricultural land. And finally, what we're moving on to is we are trying to further understand that we have this concept of agroecology that is now recommended as a solution for a lot of these climate risks, aberrations that we have. What we wanted to understand now, and it talks about, it has different components, it has different levels at which system should work. It talks about increasing the resource efficiency, strengthening the resilience of the system, and also securing the social equity. So it is seen as an encompassing framework which addresses not just the productivity issues but also addresses the equity issues that are there within the farm and the food system. So this is what is prescribed, and what we did now was we wanted to analyze that whether the studies that focus on agroecology within India, do they integrate all these principles that are there in agroecology. So there are 10 principles that are listed down here. So input reduction, soil health, animal health, synergies, economic diversification, social values, fairness, participation, land and resource governance, connectivity. Our interest prominently was in seeing whether if these axes of social equity are addressed in these literature that talk about agroecology. And what we found was that there is again a gap in the kind of in the intensity which these social equity indicators are being integrated, and it is yet again about a lot of input reduction, recycling and soil health that these studies talk about. So that is also one of the findings that we found. And finally, what I want to conclude with is learning from what was just said before my presentation, that for soil, that soil is a very complex ecosystem. It has many layers. We need to dig down, we need to spend time to understand how a soil is behaving, how complex the soil system is. It's not an easy solution. We cannot have one kind of instrument to understand all different variables that are there in a soil. It is composed of micronutrients, it is composed of macronutrients, right? So that is what I want to also translate. Those same analogies can be used for understanding a farmer. So a farmer in themselves is a very complex system. They have many different aspirations. They are at an individual level, they can have different aspirations, right? They can be disaggregated by their social demographic characteristics. So a farmer can differ in the age. Farmer youth who can have different aspirations. They might want different kind of things when it comes to any scheme that they're looking for. A female farmer can maybe ask for different, can seek different kind of requirements. Somebody who has a migrant status can also again seek for a different kind of incentive from a policy. And ethnicity and education, of course. Ethnicity, which in Indian case is about caste, is something which is deeply rooted still, and a lot of our interventions, we see the outcomes are highly differentiated by the ethnicity that we get. Then it's not just about the person themselves, but it is also a lot about, it is factored in and a lot of other systems that is on in terms of the number of livestock holding that a household has, the tenure system in which the household work, the economic status, the family size. So family size, one instant that I can share from my field experience, I work with farmers from Uttarakhand, mountain farmers. Their family size is a very important factor because they do not have access to outside labor. So a family that has more number of household members is mostly the family that is opting for stepping up, because they have their kids, they have the whole family, and they're all living in a joint system. So they have a lot of people who can work on farm and who can dedicate these labor hours that are required very intensively for mountain systems. And then access to technology. And then finally, encompassing it is what orientation that farmer, she or he, has towards the farming. Is it about only subsistence? It is about organic farming, or is it about subsistence farming? So these needs are different, and the kind of interventions that might be needed is different And yeah, finally, what I wanted to also learn is that when we talk about smart solutions, is how do we see that these engage with these kind of levels of diversity that we have within the farming systems. Yeah, that's all that I have. Thank you so much for your time.
Long live India and France friendship.